Just a few years ago, I was preaching in California when I found out that one of my relatives who served with New York City's finest fire department passed away. And so they asked me to leave. I was doing something in California, and they asked me to come back and do something in Queens to do the funeral. And I knew what was going to be faced. It was some years ago, and I knew the men that I would be preaching to would be men that would have been at 9/11, that have seen death, that have seen so many different things. And thinking to myself that, God, when you put me in those situations, I don't want to just sit there and let people just be happy that they're not adverse to spiritual things, but I want them to come all the way. I want them to find God. I don't want them just to go, yes, that was a nice sermon. I want them to find Jesus and say, what a lovely Savior is what I want them to do. So when I walk into those situations, I'm saying, God, give me the right words. I remember flying from San Francisco all the way to Queens and stopping in Detroit, getting a suit so I can have a suit for the funeral. And getting ready to walk in, I saw 150 firemen, all dressed in uniform. Most of them Italians and Irish. So I was dealing with so many Catholics that were sitting in the room. I remember walking in, and the first guy looked at me, one of the captains, says, Father, it's so good to have you here, Father Tim, and we just want to thank you. And he goes, when does Mass start? I said, Mass starts in 5 minutes. And I said, it's going to be massive. So I said, just get ready. Because I don't know what God's going to do. So we're sitting there, and all these men who've both seen death and have been to Catholic church, they had no idea what to expect. As I pulled out my Bible, and for the next 40 minutes, began to take them from Genesis. I walked them through all of the Bible, brought them up Golgotha's hill of why Jesus died for them, brought them all the way to Revelation, shot them up to the throne of God, brought them down to hell, and says your fire hoses will never put out that fire, and says you've got to get right with God. That day, 48 firemen gave their heart to Jesus Christ that day. 48 firemen gave their heart to God. I didn't want people sitting there and just going, yes, this is a good sermon. I wanted them to experience Christ. One of those guys pulled off their lieutenant's coat and gave me their lieutenant's coat. It was in September. And the next morning when I woke up, it was a little warm morning, but I was wearing my fireman's coat. Man, I wasn't taking that thing. Man, I was walking into LaGuardia and people looking at me going, are you a fireman? I said, yes, I am. I put out hell. I sat on that plane. I had my fireman's coat on. Fireman Delina sitting there. I sat there, Bible was open, sweat was coming because no human being on the plane had a coat on except Fireman Delina. And so I'm sitting there, I'm reading my Bible, sweat is going all over my Bible, and finally the guy next to me looks at me and he goes, is that a Bible? I said, yes it is, and I am a fireman. He looked at me and he goes, oh man. I said, what's wrong? He says, I'm in the entertainment business. He said, I just flew in yesterday. He said, I sat next to a preacher. And he says, and here I am. Now I'm sitting next to another preacher. He says, what's God saying? I brought him to Genesis. We started right down there. I brought him all the way over to Golgotha. I shot him up to heaven, brought him right down to hell, and said, you've got to know God.